So thank you, Shantanu, and thank you for giving me opportunity to present some stuff on fundamentals of combustion. And I am Vaibhav. I am assistant professor in aerospace engineering department, and these lectures are supplementary lectures, and they will be focusing on fundamentals of combustion. So it will be a almost very basic or the first course which you want to take in the field of combustion to get into this area. And after this course you can go into many different advanced courses. As Professor Poinshaw is pointing out, you can go into instabilities, you can go into turbulent combustion, you can go into spray combustion. There are many advanced features which you can learn in the field of combustion, but this is the first course possibly if you have to take in the field of combustion. And there are four lectures in this course, and I will take two courses, and I will take two lectures, and Professor Day will take two lectures. And we have split these lectures in 2 hour duration, and then what we will do is we will again in one lecture we will have a small break in between, then we will go into the second half. So here is the course outline. So this is almost 80% of the material which we cover in a graduate level combustion course, and I can see many of the students who have already taken this course, so that will be mostly a repetition or it will be a revision of the basics of combustion. And first two points I will talk about, and then after that we will go into premix flames and diffusion flames, which Dr. Day will talk about. And as you see the course outline, first we will talk about the very basic stuff, what is stoichiometry, and then how much oxidizer you need to burn some amount of fuel, and then if you burn this fuel with the oxidizer, how much temperature you will reach, that is your adiabatic flame temperature. And then initially we say that our products are CO2 and H2O, but later on we will come to know that the products, these ideal products can also dissociate and then form other sorts of products, so like carbon monoxide and then OH and H and O. So there can be many different species which can be present. So we will also talk a little bit about equilibrium. So we will also talk about, so this first part will cover both, so it will have both first law and second law of thermodynamics. And the second part, so thermodynamics will only give you the end state. So if you have hydrogen and oxygen, it will say that it should form H2O, but how fast it should form it, we have to look little bit into the chemical kinetics. So in the second part, which we will talk about tomorrow, we will talk a little bit on chemical kinetics, and then we will sort of make a basis for studying flames. So I will leave at some level where we can transition into flames, premix flames and diffusion flames, and we will only talk about laminar flames. So this is the very basic fundamental course, so we will only talk about laminar flames. So at this point I just want to know who does not have taken this sort of course and who does not have any sort of background in this course content. So maybe 4 and 5. So maybe it will be slightly helpful for you. For others, it will be mostly revision of what you already know. So textbook will be mostly following this very standard textbook which we follow for our graduate level course by Stephen Turns, and then you also can go to some advanced textbooks. So I'll start with the first part. So very simple definition, we all sort of know what combustion is. It is sort of burning, you have fuel and oxidizer, and then you produce heat, and then there are products, and there are different ways to say the same thing. You convert your chemical energy into heat energy, you have potential energy in the bonds, and then you convert into kinetic energy of these atoms. So these atoms and molecules are moving faster, which we call as their temperature has increased. Again your bonds are rearranging, and then you get temperature rise, and mostly we call rapid oxidation as combustion. So slow oxidation process, sort of digestion and rusting, we don't call that as combustion. So So first step we want to know in the field of combustion is how much amount of oxidizer should I need to burn some amount of fuel. So I can define stoichiometric oxidizer fuel ratio as the mass of oxidizer. So you should note that it is in terms of mass. So it is mass of oxidizer needed to completely burn a unit mass of fuel. So it is mass on both the sides, and then you want to form ideal product. So there are many keywords. So it is based on mass, and then you are forming ideal products, and then you don't leave any oxygen in the products. So for each atom, so for example for carbon, your ideal product if you are burning with oxygen is carbon dioxide. For hydrogen it is H2O. So again you are fixing that your products are ideal. And then I can define equivalence ratio as stoichiometric oxidizer fuel ratio divided by your actual oxidizer fuel ratio. And again, if you are fuel lean or if you have less amount of fuel or more amount of oxidizer, your equivalence ratio is less than 1, and vice versa it is greater than 1. And then if you have just the right amount of oxidizer to burn some amount of fuel, your equivalence ratio is 1. So very simple examples. So if you have fuel like carbon, it is very easy to form these stoichiometric relations. You know that your ideal product is carbon dioxide, so you just have to burn one carbon atom with one O2 molecule, and then you will get one molecule of CO2. So in terms of kilomole, so kilomole is just a number, and then if you want to find out the mass, then you have to consider the molecular weights of this fuel and oxidizer. And then from here you can see that to burn 12 kg of carbon you need 32 kg of oxygen. So your oxidizer by fuel ratio stoichiometric is 2.67. So again you should note that we have ideal product carbon dioxide. There is no oxygen left on the right hand side. Again, if I can complicate this problem by saying that my oxidizer is not O2, it also has some nitrogen in it. So I can use oxidizer as air, and then I know that air, it has 21% of molecules are oxygen, 79% molecules are nitrogen. So I know a ratio of these number. So I can say that my oxidizer is air, where for each molecule of O2 I carry 3.76 number of molecules of N2, and I can again write the simple stoichiometric relations. Again my product is CO2, again N2 just goes to N2, so it does not split or it does not do any funny stuff. And again I can calculate the mass of this oxidizer, and then I can find oxidizer fuel ratio, stoichiometric oxidizer fuel ratio. So these are very simple cases, but if you, so very simple and systematic way to find out the oxidizer fuel ratio is to actually do atom balance. So if your fuel starts getting complicated, your oxidizer starts getting complicated, you don't know how to balance this equation. So best thing to do is to write your, you should try to balance the atoms. So for example, in this case you know that you have 4 types of atoms, CHON. If you balance the atoms on both the sides, you will get 4 equations. So if you balance CHON atoms, you get 4 equations. And then if you see the number of unknowns, so again we know that C should go to CO2, so it will have only one unknown. H should go to H2O, there is only one unknown. N2 just comes out as N2, there is one unknown. And then we don't have any oxygen here, but we want to find out the amount of oxygen on left hand side. So we have 4 unknowns and we have 4 equations. And then you can find out all these 4 unknowns, and then you can write this stoichiometric relation. So in this case your B is 2, B is 1, C is 2, A is 2, and then D is 7.52. So in this way what you can do is you can write down the stoichiometric relation, and then based on the molecular weights then you can find the amount of oxidizer required to burn 1 kg of your fuel. So your oxidizer by fuel ratio is 17.2. So later on, if your fuel is very funny, I mean if you have fuel has, and suppose it is So your fuel itself has oxygen, and then you are saying that 20% is methanol, 80% is ethanol. If your oxidizer has, say suppose carbon dioxide and water, so if your oxidizer also has a funny composition and fuel also has a funny composition, you have CO2 in your oxidizer, you have oxygen in your fuel. Again, the best way to do is to do these atom balance, form these equations, and then try to find out oxidizer by fuel ratio. So that is the thing. So in the end you have to just do atom balance. To calculate these oxidizer by fuel ratio. So maybe you can try some of these exercises at your convenience. And so again, so we'll get into some of the basic stuffs, like for a mixture you want to find out the mole fractions and mass fractions. So to lead into that, I am just taking an example that if I have excess air, or if my equivalence ratio is less than 1. So in this case, suppose if my equivalence ratio is 0.5, then my oxidizer by fuel ratio will be, so I will have more oxidizer than fuel, so it will be 34.44. So I have twice the amount of air as compared to stoichiometric. Then again so in this case I know my left hand side. So again I can do atom balance and then try to find out these 4 unknowns. So I have 4 atom balance equations, and then I can try to find out the 4 unknowns on right hand side. I don't know how much oxygen is left here, I don't know the other species. So again I can do all this, and then I can find out these coefficients. So in this case I can focus on this mixture. So this is my product mixture. It has 1 kilomole of CO2, 2 kilomole of H2O, 15.04 kilomole of N2, and then 2 kilomole of O2. So I can find out my product composition, and then I can, so with this example I can go into some of the basic definitions which may pop up again and again in this course. So I can find out mole fractions of all the species. So it is number of moles for one species divided by total number of moles. Again, mass fractions of each species, mass of the species divided by total mass of the mixture. Again, I can convert my mass fractions into mole fractions, and then I can find out molecular weight of the mixture. So it will be total mass of the mixture divided by total number of moles. So molecular weight of the mixture is for 1 kilomole of molecules or atoms, what is your mass? So again your molecular weight of air will be, so it is not summation of molecular weight of oxygen and N2. So it is, you have to weight by your mole fractions. So your molecular weight of air is 28.8. So again we can illustrate that with an example. So for the same mixture I have this many number of kilomoles of different species, and then I can find out the total kilomoles, and then I can find out individual mole fractions of each species. I can find out individual mass fractions of each species. Again, point to note is summation of mole fractions and mass fraction has to be 1. And I can find out molecular weight of the mixture, and once my molecular weight of the mixture is known, I can convert my mass fractions into mole fractions. So later on you may need to juggle between mole fractions and mass fractions and how to interconvert them. You can follow these simple steps. So this is regarding mixtures and then product composition, and then sort of related to stoichiometry, like how much amount of oxidizer is required to burn some amount of fuel. And the second step, second basic thing which you want to know is the standardized enthalpy. So in your aerodynamics course or in mostly other courses where your CP is not varying much, your composition is not changing, so you mostly write your enthalpy. So you mostly write your enthalpy as where your Cp is specific heat and then you have the temperature. But in combustion problems, your Cp will vary a lot. So we'll see that later on. So in your combustion problem, you need to account for variable Cp. And second thing is, because your composition is changing, you need to account for the energy in the bonds. So for example, H2 is combining with O2 and then forming H2O. So you need to account for energy of breaking of some bonds and forming of some bonds at some level, and that's why we introduce another parameter called enthalpy of formation. So we start by defining our standardized enthalpy. So we'll come back to different components of standardized enthalpy in steps. And first thing to note is your standardized enthalpy is only function of temperature. So it is not a function of pressure, it is only a function of temperature for an ideal gas. So that sort of eases our effort a little bit if it is a function of pressure. So later on we'll see that our entropy and other functions are also functions of pressure, and it makes things little complicated. And second thing is, we are using this over bar to denote properties per kilomole. So if you want to convert it into mass specific enthalpy, then it is kilojoule per kg. So you need to account for the molecular weight of that species also. So now we'll go, and later on we'll also see that why we started defining a standardized enthalpy, and then how does it help in our some of the calculations. So first we'll talk about enthalpy of formation, and then later on we'll talk about sensible enthalpy. Again, ideal gas mixtures, some other definitions. So for an ideal gas mixture, your mixture enthalpy is just summation of all the individual enthalpies. So it is molar specific enthalpy into multiplied by number of moles, and then you sum it over all the different species. And again, it is for an ideal gas mixture. So it may not be true for real gases, where if you mix two things, you may release heat and then your enthalpies may not be same. And again, for molar specific and mass specific, we need to weigh it by mole fractions and mass fractions. So again, first part is enthalpy of formation. So enthalpy of formation, it mostly accounts for energy stored in the chemical bonds as well as energy associated with the phase. So if you are going from liquid phase to solid phase, these two enthalpies will be different, and somehow we have to account that difference also in enthalpy of formation. So enthalpy of formation, it is at particular reference temperature, is the net enthalpy change associated with formation of 1 kilomole of product from its elements in stable form. So it is enthalpy of formation from stable forms of different elements. So another thing is, it is difference between enthalpies, so both product and reactants should be at the same temperature, and then we'll take an example and then see what is meant by this. So first we want to, so for enthalpy, for this enthalpy, we actually don't need an absolute value. So for example, the energy associated with in the nucleus itself, or the nuclear energy itself, may be a very large value, and then we don't need to add those large numbers to the enthalpy, and then this enthalpy is not an absolute value. So it does not account for all the energy associated with the atoms or molecules. So it is sort of only accounting for the chemical energy in the bonds and the phase change. And later on we will see that for entropy we cannot do that, but for enthalpy we do not need the absolute values. So once we do not need the absolute values, then we try to sort of start from some datum or some basic stuff, and then we will say that I will form all different products from elements in a stable form. So first we will define for each element, we will define stable forms. For example, for carbon it is solid carbon and its form is graphite. So if it is diamond, then you will have some more difference in enthalpy between graphite and diamond. For hydrogen it is H2 gas, nitrogen it is N2 gas, oxygen it is O2 gas. And the most stable forms for each element are at standard reference state. So it is at 298 Kelvin and 1 atmosphere. So at this state, what is the most stable form? We choose that form as our basic. So by definition itself, enthalpy of formation of these all stable forms will be 0, and then we will try to form different compounds and then try to build our table and then try to build enthalpy of formation of all other products. So enthalpy of for elemental stable forms, enthalpy of formation is 0. As net enthalpy change in formation of itself, so O2 forming from O2 itself, I mean your net enthalpy change will be 0. So your enthalpy of formation of O2 will be 0. So now if you want to find out enthalpy of formation of some other compound, for example H2O. So what we have to do is we have to form this H2O from stable elemental form. So we know that in H2O we have hydrogen and oxygen, and for hydrogen our most stable form is H2, oxygen our most stable form is O2. So now we want to find, I want to react H2 and O2 to form H2O, and then the difference in enthalpy between product and reactants, that is my enthalpy of formation. So one practical way to look at it is I can perform an experiment where I have a steady flow reactor. I can do steady flow energy equation, and then what I can do is I can inject 1 kilomole of hydrogen, 0.5 kilomole of, so this should be O2, and then I get H2O, 1 kilomole of H2O outside. Point to note is at inlet my temperature is reference temperature, at outlet also my temperature is my reference temperature, and that I have chosen as 298 Kelvin. So both my reactants and products both are at the same temperature. So you know that if you burn hydrogen and oxygen it will release heat. So you, to bring down your product to the same temperature, you actually need to reject the heat. So if you see your energy equation, in the end you will see that your Q dot, so I am not doing any work on it. So your Q dot will be difference between enthalpy of product and reactants. And again you know that your enthalpy, so here you have these enthalpy, so you need to account for both enthalpy of formation and sensible enthalpy term. But as you are at T reference, then this integral will be 0, and then only enthalpy of formation will remain. So your equation simplifies, your enthalpy of formation of H2 and O2 are anyway 0 because they are stable elemental forms. So if you do this experiment, then you will see that whatever amount of heat which you have to extract so that your products are at the same temperature, that heat actually gives you enthalpy of formation of H2O. So anyway, when you are extracting heat, it will be an exothermic reaction. So the heat exchange rate for 1 kilomole per second flow of H2O, it will represent the enthalpy of formation. And so these values are all tabulated. So I am just giving you an example that enthalpy of formation for H2O at 298 Kelvin is given by minus 241,845 kilojoule per kilomole. So you can also see that your enthalpy of formation of H2O is actually negative. So at same temperature, I mean your enthalpy of H2O will be lower as compared to enthalpy of mixture of H2 and O2. So Again, it is at some particular temperature. If you perform the experiment at some other temperature, these values will change slightly. Again, if I want to find out enthalpy of formation of liquid phase, then again I can do similar experiment. I need to extract some amount of energy, and then I can get H2O in the liquid phase. And you know that the difference between vapor and liquid phase enthalpy will be your enthalpy of vaporization. So your enthalpy of formation of H2O liquid will be even lower than enthalpy of formation in the vapor phase. So now you can see that your enthalpy of formation accounts for energy in the chemical bonds as well as the phase in which your species is. So you can look at enthalpy of formation of many different molecules or atoms, and all these values are tabulated, and you can see that. So if your enthalpy of formation is negative, then it does mean that, I mean, with respect to your stable elemental forms, you are actually lower down in the energy level. So it somehow suggests that these compounds are more stable, and if your enthalpy of formation is positive, it means that your products or elements are higher up in the energy level as compared to your stable elemental forms, and these are mostly unstable. So you should note that even though some of them are fuel like methane and propane, but still their enthalpy of formation is negative. So it does not mean that your fuel, so I mean it means that this compound is actually stable. So we talked a little bit about enthalpy of formation, and the second part is your sensible enthalpy, which is the enthalpy associated by heating the species from temperature Tref to whatever temperature we want to go to. So as I mentioned that we cannot use a constant Cp value in combustion problems, because we can see this chart. So your x-axis is temperature and y-axis is Cp bar, so it is molar specific heat at constant pressure, and you can see that for different species in the temperature range which is of interest for combustion people, say up to 2000 to 3000 Kelvin, your Cp can vary, or it can be almost 2 times as what you have at room temperature. So you need to account for different variation in Cp with temperature. Again, you should note that for a monoatomic gas, I mean for diatomic gas your Cp will be higher, triatomic gas your Cp will be even higher, because you have more energy storage modes associated with it. So with increase in temperature, your vibrational and rotational modes starts getting activated, and then it can absorb more and more heat, and that's why your Cp values are higher. So again, but for computational point of view, you can form polynomials, or you can use a curve fit to generate, say, a 4th order polynomial for these Cp values, and then we can plug in these polynomials into this integral and then find the sensible enthalpy part. So again, all these values are tabulated. So this is table taken from Stephen Turn's book, and for different species you have Cp values which are tabulated in terms of coefficients, and then you can use these coefficients to form the polynomial and then plug in here to get the sensible enthalpy terms. So again, this is sort of a summary of what we have done. So this chart is standardized enthalpy. Again, it has 2 parts, enthalpy of formation and the sensible enthalpy part. For your elemental stable form, so suppose my temperature is Tref. So at Tref temperature, my enthalpy of formation will be 0, sensible enthalpy term will be 0. So it will start from 0, and then because this sensible enthalpy part will start adding the enthalpy values. So it will increase with temperature. So your standardized enthalpy will increase in temperature. If you have enthalpy of formation is positive, then it can go from higher point, and then if it is negative, then it can go up from lower point. And again, the slope at each point for these chart, the slope gives your specific heat. So your Cp bar is dH bar by dt. So you can see that if your slope is continuously increasing, this means that your Cp is increasing with temperature. If it is a straight line, it means that your Cp is a constant. So now we'll see how the standardized enthalpy helps. So in textbooks, this standardized enthalpy is also tabulated. So this integration, so you can see that this is for H2O. You can see that your Cp value varies with temperature, and this is your sensible enthalpy term, which is this integral. So in the book, they have already done the integral and tabulated the values, and your enthalpy of formation at 298 Kelvin is minus 241,845, which we said. And so again, I mean, as I mentioned, your enthalpy of formation need not be same at all the temperatures. So any questions till this point? Fine. So now we'll try to see how this enthalpy of standardized enthalpy, which we have come up with, it helps to do some calculations and find out some useful parameters. So first I will define enthalpy of reaction, and your enthalpy of reaction is given as difference between enthalpy of products and enthalpy of reactants. So you should note that your enthalpy of reaction is at some particular temperature, and here both products and reactants are at same temperature, and then you find out difference between these two enthalpies. So for example, for methane combustion with oxygen, equivalence ratio is 1. You have to, so enthalpy of reaction will be enthalpy of products minus enthalpy of reactants. And again, for ideal gas mixture, I can just use sigma Ni Hi to find out enthalpy of product mixture and reactant mixture. So again, I can just do enthalpy of products minus enthalpy of reactants. Again, sensible enthalpy terms are not there because these are all at reference temperature, but if there are sensible enthalpy terms, then you need to account for that. And so again, this enthalpy of reaction is for a particular temperature, it is not for all the temperatures. So I can use tabulated values for enthalpy of formations. So I can graphically also I can represent this. So at reference temperature, I have a reactant mixture of 1 kilomole of methane, 2 kilomole of O2 and 7.5 kilomole of N2, and my product mixture is 1 kilomole of CO2, 2 kilomole of H2O and 7.52 kilomole of N2, and the difference between these two enthalpies is your enthalpy of reaction. So this is enthalpy of reactant mixture, enthalpy of product mixture, and again you can see that this difference need not be same everywhere. So it depends on how your Cp values are varying. So this enthalpy of reaction for any other temperature might be different than what you have at some other temperature. So now we'll come into heating value of a fuel. So heating value of fuel is negative of the enthalpy of reaction. So, and then we do that for per kg or per kilomole of fuel. So it means that if you are burning reactant mixture, it will actually release this much amount of, because it is going down the enthalpy level, it will release this much amount of heat. So this means that your heating value of fuel is negative of enthalpy of reaction. So if you are doing it for methane, in terms of per kilomole, it will be 802 megajoule per kilomole, and on mass basis, your lower heating value will be around 50 megajoule per kg. So here your product is H2O vapor, your product is H2O liquid. So if your product H2O is liquid, then you can release more amount of more heat, and then you will have slightly higher heating value. So this is the heating value which Dr. Poinsot was also talking about, that for fuel, mostly for these hydrocarbon fuels, it will be around this range, around 50 megajoule per kg, which will be at least 10-20 times higher than what you get from a battery. So this is one of the major advantages why we choose combustion system over other systems to store energy as well as to release energy. So this is sort of storage of energy, and then how fast you can release this energy. Because of both these advantages, we use combustion systems over other electrical systems. So the point is, we can systematically come to this heating value of fuel by following some systematic step. Again, point to note is this is at some particular temperature, because your enthalpy of reaction is at some particular temperature. This value is also at some particular temperature, and for different temperature it may vary slightly. So that was the first question, sort of, that if I burn some amount of methane, how much energy I will release. So if I burn some amount of methane, I know that this much amount of energy I will release. And the second question, if suppose I am burning my fuel in an adiabatic constant pressure reactor, then how much or what will be my product gas temperature. So constant pressure combustion is of course very widely present in gas turbine engines, in diesel engines. Even if you are burning fuel in open atmosphere, your pressure is constant. So you want to know what will be the temperature associated with the product gases if I burn my fuel in a constant pressure system. So I can use first law of thermodynamics, and I can see that whatever is heat transfer, it will directly be reflected in terms of enthalpy. So this directly comes from your first law, and if my system is adiabatic, then I can clearly see that del Q is 0, which means that your enthalpy should remain constant. So in this constant pressure reactor, your enthalpy should remain constant, which means that your enthalpy of product is equal to enthalpy of reactants. Again, the point to note is your enthalpy of reactant is at your reactant temperature, and then your product will go to a higher temperature. So you can see that you are actually releasing this much amount of energy, and then this energy is sort of heating your products to some product gas temperature. And other way to look at it is your enthalpy is constant, so you have to trace the straight line, and then your temperature of the product will be higher as compared to your temperature of your reactants. So this temperature is your adiabatic flame temperature at constant pressure, and this also gives us some idea why we started accounting for energy in the chemical bonds into our standardized enthalpy. Because if you just do enthalpy of product is equal to enthalpy of reactants by using the simple formula, it will just give you same temperature. So now this enthalpy itself accounts for the chemical energy which is associated with chemical bonds. So now we can see one example of adiabatic flame temperature at constant pressure. Point to note is we are still dealing with ideal products. So we are still saying that my carbon goes to CO2 and hydrogen goes to H2O. So I clearly know what my products are. So it is given that my reactant temperature is 298 Kelvin, and from first law my reactant enthalpy is equal to my product enthalpy. So I can find out enthalpy of the reactants. Sensible enthalpy terms are 0 because it is at reference temperature. Now for enthalpy of products, I need to account for enthalpy of formation definitely, but I also need to account for the sensible enthalpy part. So for calculating enthalpy of products, I also have this integral which I need to take care of, and I know that these Cp values have been tabulated as polynomials. So again I can have a polynomial, I can integrate it and then form an algebraic equation. Again this T adiabatic is unknown, which you want to find out. So again you can integrate it, and you know that you have one equation. So you have one equation and you have one unknown. So you can form an so you have only one unknown T adiabatic. You can form an algebraic equation. It will be say fifth order algebraic equation. You can find a root, you can choose a realistic root, and then you can calculate the adiabatic flame temperature as 2328 Kelvin. So if you burn methane with oxygen and then if you choose ideal products, then you can expect your temperature, product gas temperature to be around 2300 Kelvin, which is pretty high. So this also gives you sort of idea if you start burning with air, what sort of temperature you should expect. And another point is, well, you have clearly specified your oxidizer. If your N2 is not here, then you should expect even higher temperature, because on the product side your N2 is not present to absorb the heat. So again this term will not be there, and then your adiabatic flame temperature will be even higher. So if you don't want to do all this integration and then big polynomials, then if you just choose some intermediate Cp values, your equation becomes very easy, your integration becomes very, very easy, and then you have one equation and one unknown, and then you can find your adiabatic flame temperature. Of course, it will not be same as what you do when you do a rigorous analysis, but it will give you a rough estimate of how much to expect from this adiabatic flame temperature. And again, as I mentioned, this inert gas N2 affects T adiabatic as it absorbs energy at higher temperature. So because you have N2 in your products, it will absorb the energy and then it will not allow temperature to go as high as if you burn with only oxygen. So that was for constant pressure reactor. If you have another system which is only constant volume, for example in SI engines, if you consider that your combustion is taking place at constant volume or you are not allowing your products to expand, then you can do a systematic analysis for a constant volume reactor also. And from first law you can see that your heat transfer will be directly reflected into your change in internal energy. And again, for an adiabatic system, your internal energy T adiabatic is equal to your internal energy of the reactants at your reactant temperature. So I mean, anyway we have all started to tabulate everything in terms of enthalpies. So we will not keep on working with your internal energy. I can use the definition of enthalpy, which is equal to U plus PV. I can use ideal gas law and then again form a single equation in terms of only one unknown, which is T adiabatic, and then I have all the material available to deal with my enthalpies. So I have one equation, one unknown, and then again I can solve this and I can find number of moles in products and reactants, and then I can solve for the adiabatic flame temperature. And for a simple case, I can see that my adiabatic flame temperature for constant volume process is 600 Kelvin higher than what I do for constant pressure process. And why it should be like this? Yeah, so here your work, so PdV work is also 0. So everything goes into increasing the temperature of the system. So I mean the summary is like for stoichiometric, so to deal with all sort of complicated stoichiometry, you just remember that you need to do atom balance, and then we started building our basic by saying that I will define a standardized enthalpy which will account for both enthalpy of reaction, enthalpy associated with phase change, and then the sensible enthalpy part. Again, the Cp I will not take as constant but allow it to vary with respect to temperature, and then once I tabulate or I document all these things, then I can work with different systems and find out how much temperature I can reach if I burn some fuel with oxidizer in a systematic manner. So I need to know if I'm burning at constant pressure or constant volume, but systematically I can arrive at the adiabatic flame temperatures, and also I can arrive at how much energy a fuel stores. So I can arrive at what is the heating value of the fuel. So at this point we'll take a 10 minutes break, and then so till now we have only talked about first law, then we'll go into second law and then see that we don't have to only talk about ideal products. So we already knew the composition of ideal products, and then we add reactants, and then if we have to find out adiabatic flame temperature, we can just trace this line and then reach the adiabatic flame temperature. So of course it is for constant pressure process because your enthalpy is constant. So in the first half we said that our products will be ideal. So C goes to CO2, H goes to H2O, N2 just comes out as it is. But we know that at high temperatures, I mean this CO2 can split, it can form CO and O2. Even you can have different sorts of radicals. Your nitrogen can combine with oxygen to form NO. Your oxygen and hydrogen can combine to form OH. So there can be many other products. So it need not be only ideal products. There can be many other products, product species. And if you see this line, then this line is sort of your first law. So it imposes the constraint of first law where you will end up. So in your first law, if your products are ideal, your temperature is this. If you have some other products, for example, your CO2 has split into CO and O2, your temperatures will be slightly lower, and then you will trace some other line. If the splitting is even higher, you can trace some other line. So with different types of products, or if you have a different composition of your product, you are anyway not violating your first law. So for all different types of products, you can still apply your first law, and then you will get different temperatures. But if you want to find out, so if you choose that my products will have CO and O2 and N2 and NO and OH and all other species, then my second law of thermodynamics will help me to find out what will be the composition of my product gases. So my second law will govern the equilibrium composition, and again the point is it is at equilibrium. So if you allow it to react and stay for enough time, then you will reach equilibrium. So again the keyword is equilibrium composition, and later on we will see that another complication is chemical kinetics. Whether you reach this equilibrium composition or not, that will be governed by how fast your reactions are and whether you are actually reaching that equilibrium or not. But with thermodynamics I can get the end state. So thermodynamics always gives me the end state, and then how to reach that end state, it depends on kinetics. So both real and ideal products will comply with first law, but my second law will tell me what will be the product composition. So now we can start talking about second law. So for a closed system, I know that change in entropy will always be greater than or equal to del Q by T, and if my system is adiabatic, so if my del Q is 0, then I always know that my ds will be greater than or equal to 0. This means that my entropy inside the system will keep on increasing, and then it will reach a maximum value at equilibrium. So it means that for an adiabatic system at equilibrium, so at equilibrium your ds will be 0 and your S will tend to maximum value. So even if you have constant pressure process, if you have constant volume process, does not matter, as long as it is adiabatic, your entropy or the mixture entropy or the entropy of mixture entropy of the gases will always tend to maximum at equilibrium. Another point to note is, for a closed system, only way this entropy can decrease is by losing heat. So there is no other way a closed system can decrease its entropy, it's only by losing heat. So now we have again introduced another property, another thermodynamic property, which is entropy. Now as we have done for our enthalpy, we also need to tabulate or systematically find the entropy values, and we can just start with our TdS relation. Just TdS is equal to dH minus VdP, and then I can write this in terms of molar specific entropy. So entropy is again a property, its units are kilojoule per k mole Kelvin, and your TdS is dH minus VdP, V is specific volume, and I can again use ideal gas law, and then I can form an entropy relation where you have contribution from temperature and pressure. So this you would have seen in your thermodynamics course. So if I want to find out entropy at some other state at different temperature and different pressure, then I can do that. So first point to note is your entropy is a function of both temperature and pressure. So again, so your enthalpy was only a function of temperature, so your entropy is function of both temperature and pressure. And again I can take help of, so I can see that I can write dH as Cp dt, and then Cp values I have already tabulated or I have already documented. So I can write my entropy of a species at temperature T and pressure Pi as standard reference state entropy or entropy at 1 atmosphere pressure and some reference temperature. For this case it is 298 Kelvin, and you should always remember that this knot here, it always corresponds to standard state pressure, and this your P naught is 1 atmosphere. So if you are writing SI naught, then it means that entropy is at 1 atmosphere pressure. So your entropy at some temperature, and then if you go from reference temperature to some other temperature, then you are actually increasing the entropy, and due to change in temperature you can have another term where you go from T reference to T, and then you can account for entropy change due to pressure in another term which comes from here. So you just integrate it and then you can get another term. So you can have effect of change in pressure and effect of change in temperature in separate terms. You can see that this thing is constant, so these things will be tabulated. So at reference temperature and 1 atmosphere pressure, this will be a constant similar to your enthalpy of formation sort of thing, and then the second term is only a function of temperature. So you can combine these two terms and call it as standard state entropy of species I. So so it is only a function of temperature because you are already specifying that your pressure is P naught. So here you can clearly see that your standard state entropy is only a function of temperature because you are calculating it at a standard state pressure of 1 atmosphere. So it is, so now you can write your entropy, which is function of both temperature and pressure, in terms of only a function of temperature, and then another term which is only a function of pressure. So this is your standard state entropy, which is your entropy at reference temperature, and then you go from reference temperature to some other temperature. So again, you need to know that, well, your standard state entropy at reference temperature is never 0, even for your elemental stable forms or any other forms. So these entropy values are absolute, unlike your enthalpy values, and you know that enthalpy values are absolute, and entropy is, I mean, you know that by third law of thermodynamics, your entropy is 0 at 0 Kelvin for a perfect crystal. So at 298 Kelvin, I mean, it has some finite value. So again, you can find these tabulated values, which has, so you can have this constant value, and then again you can integrate this function Cp by T, and again tabulate this standard state entropy. So again you can see that there is a knot here, and this means that that is at 1 atmosphere. That means that it is not a function of pressure, it is only a function of temperature. That's how you can tabulate the standard state entropy with respect to temperature. So you note that this is your constant term at 298 Kelvin, and then it increases because you are adding another term. You are adding another term to it. So again you can find these tabulated values which are only a function of temperature. Again note that even though here they have written as not values, enthalpy of formation at standard state pressure, but for an ideal gas which we are considering, this is sort of redundant because it is not a function of pressure. So again, if you are writing a code or if you are doing computations, then tabulated values may not be helpful, and then you can use these polynomials, and using these polynomials then you can integrate this function and then find the standard state entropy. So anyway you have all these coefficients for Cp, and then you can find your standard state entropy from these polynomials. So again for an ideal gas mixture, enthalpy was very straightforward. So it was just, so this was also a function of temperature, and this was also a function of temperature. But for entropy, you need to consider both temperature and pressure, and you can see that for ideal gas mixtures it is Ni, Si, and it is both function of temperature, and then this Pi is your partial pressure. So again, partial pressure of species I is the pressure if that species occupies the full mixture volume at the same temperature. So this is an extensive property, and then you can write in terms of mass specific as well as mole specific values. So again, for the point here is, like for your entropy you have to be little bit extra careful. You need to account for these partial pressures. So your entropy of species I also depends on your partial pressure. So you need to be more careful when you are dealing with entropy. So now we have some sort of basis of what entropy is, how we can calculate it, and then we can proceed with some sort of calculations with this. So suppose if you have an isolated system, which means that it is a constant volume system, you don't allow any shaft work to work on it, any shaft work to be present. So if you have an isolated system, so you know that from first law of thermodynamics, your internal energy will be constant. It is a constant volume system. So in your isolated system you don't allow any mass to exchange, no heat, no work. So if you have a constant volume system, you don't have any shaft work, you don't have any work interaction, and your constant mass means that you are not allowing any mass to exchange the system. And then from first law you will see that your internal energy is constant, so your del Q is du, so du should be 0. So last time we saw that your del Q, a constant volume system, and then you don't allow any heat to transfer, so your U should remain constant. So we can also call it as UVM system. So suppose we have carbon monoxide and oxygen, and then it goes to CO2, and we know that it may not go to 100% CO2, so maybe some fraction of CO2 will remain dissociated, and then it will, in the end we will have some sort of mixture where we have some fraction of CO2, some fraction of CO, some fraction of O2. So if we had chosen ideal products, then this was all 100% CO2, but now as we are allowing the dissociation, we can see that we have introduced another variable here, which is fraction of CO2 which is dissociated. So we can see that as we have another variable, we need another equation so that we can find out the product composition. So again, if you need to find out the final pressure, I can use ideal gas law and then find the final pressure. So again, point to note is equilibrium state of the products will be determined by both first and second laws of thermodynamics. So this second law will help me to find out this extra variable which I have introduced. So with first law, I can write down that the internal energy at reactant temperature should be equal to my internal energy at the product temperature. So even if my alpha goes from 0 to 1, I can slide this bar anywhere, and I can get different product temperatures, and I can have different product compositions. So first law does not restrict me to arrive at certain product composition. But if I start calculating the mixture entropy, so your mixture entropy is Ni Si bar, which is function of both temperature and partial pressure. So you can see that your mixture enthalpy is summation of enthalpies of all the species like CO2, CO, O2 weighted by their number of moles, that is Ni's, and then they are at the partial pressures. So it is entropy of CO2 at partial pressure of CO2 and then the final temperature. So I can calculate this mixture entropy, and what I can do is, once I calculate this mixture entropy for different values of alpha, I can plot this mixture entropy, and then I know that for an adiabatic system, this mixture entropy should maximize at equilibrium. So which means that if I am going from this side, your mixture entropy will keep on increasing. So if your undissociated fraction is 1 minus alpha, so which means that here you have complete reactants, here you have ideal product. So if my CO and CO2 starts getting converted to CO2, it will keep on increasing, and at some alpha value, it will reach a maximum value, and then my second law will prevent me to go to the other side. So it will not allow me to decrease the entropy of the system. So this is the state where it will finally remain. So which means that your mixture entropy, your maximum value at equilibrium for an isolated system, wherever your mixture entropy is maximum, that is the point which will give you your equilibrium composition. And then corresponding to that point, anyway, you can calculate the temperature. So with second law, it is helping me to fix my product composition based on whatever function is getting maximized. So now a slightly different thing, and then we'll see how to connect different functions. So a little bit on Gibbs free energy. So again, for homogeneous reacting system, I can form relations like this. So you can see that your TdS is equal to du plus Pdv if my system is not reacting, but if I allow it to react, then my entropy can again increase, and then I can formulate a relation something like this. And if my system is at constant temperature and pressure, and M denotes that it is a closed system, I am not allowing any mass to come in or go out. So if my system is TPM, a constant temperature, pressure and constant mass. Then I can take this P inside, I can take this T inside, then I can have U plus PV minus TS, which is less than or equal to 0. Again, U plus PV is defined as enthalpy, so enthalpy is just a defined term, which is U plus PV. And then I see that I have a function H minus Ts, and then I can define another variable and I'll call it as Gibbs free energy, which is H minus Ts. And then I'll see that for a constant temperature and pressure system, my Gibbs free energy is less than or equal to 0. So for a closed system at constant temperature pressure, dG is less than or equal to 0. So it will keep on decreasing, so your G will keep on decreasing, and at equilibrium your G will be minimum. So it will keep on decreasing, and then at equilibrium your dG will be 0, and so G will attain a minimum value at equilibrium. So you should see that, well, your first system was UVM, so it was an isolated system, constant volume adiabatic system. Your second system is TPM, constant temperature and pressure and constant mass. And you can see that for these two systems, so again here, because you want to maintain constant temperature pressure, there can be heat interaction, there can be work interaction, its volume can increase or decrease. Just to maintain this temperature, your heat needs to be rejected or absorbed. So in this case your G attains a minimum value, not the entropy. So your entropy is not maximum. Here your Gibbs free energy attains a minimum value. So again, for an ideal gas mixture, similar to entropy, my Gibbs free energy of a mixture is Ni, Gi, T and P. So again your Gibbs free energy is H minus Ts. So it has enthalpy and entropy is also a function of pressure. So again your Gibbs free energy will be function of both temperature and pressure. So your molar specific Gibbs free energy is Hi minus Tsi, and again I can write this Si in terms of standard state entropy. So this naught denotes that it is at 1 atmosphere pressure, and then another term which gives me variation with pressure. So again I can write my Gibbs molar specific Gibbs free energy as Hi minus Tsi naught plus RUT ln Pi by P naught. So again these two terms I can club, and I can say that this is my standard state Gibbs free energy. So this is your standard state Gibbs free energy at pressure is equal to P naught. So again this I can call it Gi naught, similar to what I did for my entropy. So again I am splitting this into a function of temperature, and here also you have a temperature term, but clearly you are extracting out one term which is only a function of temperature. So what I am trying to find out is, I am trying to find out more and more equations. So from second law, for isothermal and isobaric closed system, I know that my Gibbs free energy should attain a minimum, and G mixture I know that it is Ni into molar specific Gibbs free energy, and then at equilibrium I can differentiate this and set it to 0, and then try to find out some relation which I can use later on. So I can use chain rule and then differentiate this, and then dG will be 0, so this is set to 0. I can show that the second term will all go to 0, and then I only have this first term. So at equilibrium sigma Gi into dNi is 0. So I don't have the second term, I only have the first term. So now I want to go a little bit more into this, and if I have a general reacting system, for example CO plus half O2 goes to CO2, I can write in terms of these variables where gammas are the stoichiometric coefficients. So I know that change in number of moles of A is actually proportional to the stoichiometric coefficient, which means that if 1 kilomole of CO is consumed, correspondingly half kilomole of O2 is consumed. So change in number of moles is associated or directly proportional to the stoichiometric coefficient, and 1 kilomole will be produced. So here it will be negative, here it will be positive. So similarly I can say that my change in number of moles is directly proportional to the stoichiometric coefficients, and Gi I can write in terms of standard state Gibbs free energy, which is only a function of temperature. You can see the knot here, and dNi, which I can write in terms of gamma i's, and the constant will just cancel out throughout the equation. So I have formed one equation, and then seeing at this equation, what I can do is I will try to separate the pressure terms and temperature terms in second part. So I have sort of collected similar terms and then arranged into an equation, and I have these ratios of these partial pressures, ratios of these partial pressures. So this is ratios of the partial pressures, and in the numerator side these are all products, on denominator side these are all reactants, and on right hand side I have collected all the terms which are functions of temperature. So these are standard state Gibbs free energy, and again you can see that all these terms are corresponds to products and these terms corresponds to reactants. So I can call this as delta G naught T, which is standard Gibbs function change, and you can see that again there is a knot, which means that it is at a standard state pressure of 1 atmosphere. So this Gibbs function change is at 1 atmosphere, which means that it is only a function of temperature. So this delta G is only a function of temperature. These are all functions of temperature, and so I am defining another term and calling it as equilibrium constant. So this RUT ln Kp is equal to delta G naught T, and then I can rearrange and say that my equilibrium constant is delta G naught by RUT. So point to note here is you can see that your Kp is only a function of temperature. So it depends on delta G naught, which is only a function of temperature, and you have temperature term. So Kp is not a function of pressure, it is only a function of temperature, and your equilibrium constant is unitless. So I can further process this equilibrium constant in terms of mole fractions. So these partial pressures I can write in terms of mole fractions and the total pressure, and I can take out all the mole fractions on one side, and then the total pressure divided by standard pressure will have all these coefficients which are collected towards it. So I can also further process it and write in terms of mole fractions. So again, point to note is this term need not be 0, and your total pressure need not be your standard state pressure. So for example, if you have CO plus O2 system, it goes to CO2, and if you increase your total pressure, so what happens to your equilibrium constant? So it remains same. It is not a function of pressure. So even if you increase your total pressure, your equilibrium constant will not change. So your left hand side is only a function of temperature. This remains constant. This term decreases. So if you are increasing P total, this term decreases. This means that your first term has to increase because this term is constant. So which means that you are forming more products. So which means that you are shifting towards right hand side, and then you can also see that if you are increasing pressure, it will try to shift towards right hand side where you have less number of moles, and which will try to oppose your reaction, which you would have learned as Le Chatelier's principle. But point to note is your equilibrium constant is only a function of temperature. It has nothing to do with pressure. And this delta G naught you can calculate as change in enthalpy minus T delta S naught. So, and again you can note that your equilibrium constant you can write in terms of enthalpy change and entropy change. So you can write in terms of two expressions, and this Kp also sort of gives you an idea that so if your this term is frozen, then if your Kp is higher, then you know that your product composition will be higher. So if your Kp is higher, which means that if your delta H is negative, so if your enthalpy change of the reaction is negative, which means that your reactants are allowed to go towards lower energy level, then it will sort of try to favor your products. Or if your delta S, which means that your entropy change is higher, or if your entropy is allowed to increase, then again it will favor more products. So in this equation itself, we can see that if you are combining CO and O2 and forming only one molecule, then you can sort of see that your entropy is sort of decreasing. So on one hand, your entropy is sort of decreasing, but on the other hand, because you are combining CO and O2 and forming CO2, you are going down the energy level. So it doesn't want to decrease entropy, but it want to go to a lower energy level. So there is sort of compromise between these two, and that's how it will attain some equilibrium level. So this is an example, you can look at it at your leisure time, but you can calculate your change in standard state Gibbs function change from all the tabulated values. You can write in terms of HI, SI is also tabulated. You can plug in all the numbers and you can get Kp as at some number. So this is an example which you can look at later on. And once you know Kp, your total, so for this example my total pressure is 1 atmosphere, this term drops out. So I have another equation, so I have formed another equation in terms of these mole fractions. So you have found Kp, which is only function of temperature, as some number, and then in terms of these mole fractions, and you know that you have three variables, xCO2, xCO and xO2. You need two more equations so that you can find all these three, and other two will be your atom balance equations. So you have carbon and oxygen, you do atom balance on both the sides for carbon and oxygen, you find two more equations and solve for all these three. Of course you need to specify what is your initial composition, then you can get all these three variables. So point is, if you have chosen only CO2, then you had only, you don't need another equation to solve for all the variables. So again, if you do calculations, you can see that for this system, so xCO2 is 0.82. So from these three equations, I can find out that the mole fraction of CO2 is 0.82, and corresponding to 0.82, my 1 minus alpha will be, so this is mole fraction, total number of moles divided by number of moles, on numerator you have number of moles of CO2. So this is my equilibrium composition, and as this is a TPM system, my Gibbs free energy will attain a minimum at that level. So if you are writing a code, you can also write in terms of G mixture and then try to minimize it. It will give you equilibrium composition, a sort of analytical way, or the way which you can do by hand is by forming these Kp equations and then find the solution, and then that solution will minimize the Gibbs function. So now we have seen two systems where we have UVM system, you have TPM system. In UVM system your entropy maximizes, in TPM system your Gibbs function minimizes. But we'll see how to proceed when we have some other systems also. So again we start with homogeneous reacting system, and it can be shown that I can write this internal energy as function of, so because this is a multi-component system, I need, apart from these two variables, I need more variables, that is number of moles present in the system for n component system. So for anyway I can start from this relation, and at equilibrium I know that du is equal to TdS minus PdV, and I can compare, so I can differentiate this and I can compare different terms, and I can form this relation as this, and then I can see that for at equilibrium my last term should go to 0, that is mu I dni should be 0, and this mu I is del u by del ni at constant entropy, volume and all other components are fixed. So this is called as chemical potential. This means that what is the change in internal energy if you increase or if you inject some number of moles of a particular species. So this is chemical potential for a particular species. So this is your chemical potential, which means that at equilibrium your this expression of chemical potential multiplied by dni should be 0, and for all the processes it should be less than or equal to 0. So you can get it from here. So it will be sort of repetition. If you have a UVM system, your du and dv goes to 0, your TDS is this, but mu I dni should always be less than or equal to 0 for all the processes, which means that your ds should always be greater than or equal to 0, which means that your entropy should maximize at equilibrium. And at equilibrium, again your mu I dni is equal to 0. If you have HPM system, which means that constant enthalpy, constant pressure M, which is adiabatic constant pressure process or adiabatic constant pressure system, in this case you can plug in H as U plus PV. So U you can put in terms of H and PV and then form a relation, and then again for constant pressure and constant enthalpy, again you get the same relation, and then you see that your entropy should maximize at equilibrium. So which we started out when we talked about entropy. I mean, if it is an adiabatic system, your entropy has to maximize at equilibrium. So if it is a constant temperature, volume, constant mass, constant temperature and volume system, again you can use this relation, and then for constant temperature and constant volume you have dA is equal to mu I dni, and A is your Helmholtz free energy, which you define as U minus Ts, as you have defined G as H minus Ts. So for constant temperature, volume, constant mass, temperature and volume system, again you are at equilibrium, your mu I dni is equal to 0 and your Helmholtz free energy is minimum. So you can see that different, so for different systems your different properties are going to either maximum or minimum value. And for constant temperature and pressure system, again I can show that my Gibbs free energy attains a minimum. And for all the cases, the criteria for equilibrium is your chemical potential multiplied by dni, and you sum it over, is equal to 0. So now I need to somehow connect this chemical potential to the molar specific Gibbs free energy, which I have tabulated and which I have all the information about. So I will not go through all the slides, but you can go through it and you can show that your chemical potential is actually partial molar Gibbs free energy, where your, which is equal to del Gi by del Ni at constant temperature, pressure and all the other number of moles fixed. So your chemical potential, and again I can show that this term is equal to my, so this term is equal to my molar specific Gibbs free energy. So my chemical potential is actually molar specific Gibbs free energy, and at equilibrium for all the cases I know that my mu I dni is equal to 0, mu I is same as Gi, so it means that your Gi dni is equal to 0, and we know that when we are using Gi dni is equal to 0, we form this Kp relation. So you can look at, so we started out from here, Gi dni is equal to 0, and then arrived at our Kp relation. So which means that if I use my Kp equation for different systems, it will maximize or minimize different properties. So for example, if I use Kp relation for an adiabatic constant pressure system, it will maximize my entropy. So now I can use that for a more useful system to find out adiabatic flame temperature at equilibrium at constant pressure. So I know that for constant pressure adiabatic reactor, it is an HPM system, constant enthalpy, constant pressure, constant mass. And for this system, my S will tend to maximum, and I can directly use my Kp equation, which will allow me to go to maximum entropy. And again, for this case and for all the computations which we do, we always choose the products. So we have to anyway specify what products I will allow here. So I am saying that I will allow CO and H2 apart, and also O2, because your CO2 can split into CO and O2. So I have 6 species, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I don't know the product gas temperature, so I have 6 species and 1 temperature, it is 7 unknowns. And if I do element balance, then I already have 4 equations. If I do energy conservation, that is first law, which means that H reactant is equal to H product. I add one more equation, which means that I have 5 equations. I need to have 2 Kp equations so that I can close the formulation and then find all the unknowns. So I need 2 independent Kp equations. So I need to consider some more reactions. So among these products, I can choose which can react with which to form the products. For example, CO can react with O2 to form CO2, H2 can react with O2 to form H2O. So these are separate reactions, and these reactions will also be at equilibrium. So another thing is I cannot choose this equation and this equation because they are linearly dependent. So I have just multiplied this equation into 2 times, I will get the same Kp equation for both the relation. And if I subtract equation 2 and equation 1 and form the third equation, I cannot use all 3. So I have to choose only 2. I don't have to choose dependent equations. So I can form Kp equations for these 2 reactions. So I can choose only and any 2 reactions. So once I form 2 more Kp equations, my formulation is closed. So again, this is the process which one can follow. So I can do 4 element balance. I can form 2 Kp equations, and these pertains to these 2 reactions, and I have these unknowns and all other stuff are known. My product temperature is also unknown. So you can see that it is becoming very messy. Once I try to solve it, it is not a very trivial job to solve it. But I mean, once I use my energy equation, my problem is closed. So I can use my energy equation, and so I have another equation. So I have 7 equations, I have 7 unknowns. I can solve for it. So for constant volume system, again your energy balance equation is slightly different. Again you do the same thing, but your energy equation is slightly different. So again your final pressure is also an unknown, but you use another equation which is your ideal gas law. So you have 8 equations, 8 unknowns. So the point is, if you follow this Kp route, then the thing is these equations are very messy and very complicated to solve. In a highly nonlinear system of equations, as T products is unknown. If you have a constant volume system, your final pressure is also unknown. So mostly what these codes do, they mostly minimize these functions like this Gibbs free energy. They will try to minimize this Gibbs free energy and then impose a constraint that your enthalpy should remain constant, or internal energy should remain constant, or temperature should remain constant. So it is sort of minimization of these systems, but if you want to do by hand or analytically, this is one way to do, is to generate more equations in terms of Kp equations and then close your system. So I will show one example where you can solve it in some software. And so again, as I said, we need to choose your product species. So I will show one example, but the point is, with many species, your adiabatic flame temperature is around 2223, and for ideal products, our adiabatic flame temperature was 2328. So it is around 100 Kelvin difference, and this difference is because your product species can split into higher energy level species, and then that will push your temperatures to slightly lower values. So I mean, you can have some online tools with which you can calculate it. So one mechanism is a GRI 3.50 mechanism. It has 53 species, 5 elements, and you can use online code, which is at NASA's website, and here you can choose what system you want to have, like it is HP or TP or TV, whatever system you want to have. You can choose the pressure, you can choose fuel. So you say that my fuel has carbon and hydrogen, and then it will give me the list of fuels which it has in this database. Then I'll say that my fuel is methane. I need to give the temperature for my reactant. Then oxidizer, so it already has air in its database. I can choose the oxidizer. It is already at 298 Kelvin, and I can provide the equivalence ratio. So I say that I want at equivalence ratio of 1, and then I can see the output file. So some sort of text file it will generate, and then you can see that your adiabatic flame temperature is around 2224. So you can see mole fractions of different species also. So you can see that, I mean, there are other species also which are present. So all the products are not ideal. You can have some other real products also. So that's all I have. So it is sort of compact summary of thermochemistry for combustion, and then we covered both first law and second law, and we tried to go from ideal products to real products, and then tried to touch base upon what equilibrium is, and then how we can incorporate the second law, and then try to get the equilibrium composition. So that's all I have for today. Any questions? Be happy to take. Yeah. So that is adiabatic number. You don't allow any heat losses to the surrounding. So equilibrium has, I mean, so at that temperature with equilibrium products, what the temperature it should reach to. So that is adiabatic flame temperature at equilibrium. So it is not for the ideal products. It is for the equilibrium composition of products. So I can. So possibly we are going from ideal products to real products. So here we want to find out the product composition, and then corresponding to that composition your temperature will be slightly lower than, or it will be lower than your ideal product if your products are ideal. Because if you are going from C to CO2, you are going to the lowest energy level, so you release maximum amount of heat. But if you are going to CO, then you are not releasing the full heat. So your temperature will be lower. So sort of this is the temperature which we found, and this difference was around 100 Kelvin for methane. Combustion with air. So I mean, for different cases, if you burn with oxygen, this difference can be even larger, because your ideal temperature will be close to say 5000, but this temperature will be close to say 3500. There will be a lot of dissociation. So it depends on, I mean, it depends on what is your product composition, equilibrium product composition. Uh-huh. So I mean, so if that's what I'm saying. So if you are combining CO and O2, so you have 1 kilomole and then 0.5 kilomole, and then you are forming one product. So your entropy is sort of decreasing, right? But your system does not want to decrease entropy; it wants to maximize entropy, right? So there is a balance. I mean, if you are so there is balance of these two terms. I'll just so if you see this, so if you are going to the right hand side, your entropy is decreasing. So you want to maximize entropy, right? So at equilibrium. So chemical kinetics, I mean, there is no relation to chemical kinetics. Rate of reactions we are not even talking about. So it is only thermodynamics. It is only based on thermodynamics, where one function we want to maximize for. I mean, depending on different systems, your one function is maximize or minimize. So I mean, your thermodynamics always gives you the end state, right? Like even in so heat transfer is sort of kinetic mechanism. So your thermodynamics will always tell you what will be your final temperature, initial temperature. If you bring two blocks together, what will be your final temperature?
So this equilibrium state can occur at a very long time.
Right. Yes. So it has to be infinite time, and so inherent to it is like your T tends to infinity. So chemical kinetics will not even allow to go towards equilibrium composition. Yeah, like for NO formation, I mean, if you do thermodynamic like equilibrium calculation, your NO levels will be very high. But when you do real computation, I mean, because your NO formation rate is slower, don't have enough time, it doesn't go to that equilibrium composition. So that's why, like in next part, we'll talk about kinetics and then how fast you want to reach there. So here, I mean, here it will just say that if you bring hydrogen and oxygen, what products you will form. But chemical kinetics will govern whether you will go there or not.